Well, with Larry Boy's popularity starting to grow in the VeggieTales series, it made sense to give him a sequel. And trust me, this was a somewhat better video than the first one. Personally, this was my favorite Larry Boy video, well, was until Larry Boy and the Bad Apple showed up in 2006. But in terms of story and animation, this was a step towards the right direction. Sort of. The video opens by showcasing Larry Boy as a crime fighter, which was one of the things that was missing in the Fit from Outer Space video. But when he accidentally knocks over a plant from a rooftop, by the way, that was by accident, so he didn't start the whole rumor weed problem. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't meant to be, just know. And then through some unexplained logic with electricity, the rumor weed is born and she tricks Junior and Laura into telling her about Butler Alfred, who apparently said something in their class. Like something they legitimately didn't understand. So apparently saying recharging your batteries equates to being a robot? Okay. So instead of asking about it in class, or knowing some kind of figure of speech, the kids automatically assume that Alfred is a robot, all because he said he was going to recharge his batteries. Thus, the rumor weed spreads this rumor throughout town, or as many backyards as she can find in this video. And Larry Boy is called in to take on the weeds, while Alfred goes into town to ask for help, only for the people to turn on him. Now, if you haven't guessed yet, it's just like last time. Larry Boy doesn't save the day. The problem gets resolved even before he shows himself in town. By God, even the people look down on him as he crawls out of the sewer right after battling the motherweed, which we'll get to in a moment. So, with the synopsis out of the way, let's first talk about the critical stuff. And I don't mean the tiny stuff like the billboard being inconsistent with the opening scene where Larry Boy shows himself to the Milk Money Bandit. I mean, come on. You gotta admit that this movie took some liberties. Artistic license, people. I'm actually talking about what makes this movie fall flat. First, like I said before, it's the same outcome as last time, where the title hero doesn't save the day. Even taking a harsh beating doesn't count. And that's another thing. I felt like this movie didn't know whether to be risky or to play it safe. In fact, there was even a lost trailer that was deemed too scary for kids because of how dark it was. And yeah, we made a video analyzing that lost trailer a while back, so please check that out. Nonetheless, I felt that this movie was holding itself back in certain areas. In Larry Boy and the Bad Apple, the risks were all justified because temptation can be inviting and seductive, even though it's the wrong way to go. So, the risks were well earned. Here, it feels like it wants to be risky, but it couldn't. For example, they don't show Larry Boy using a gun or whatever that thing is on the rumor weed, but in a later scene, he's in bandages and bruises. I mean, there are ways of being hardcore without being graphic. Now, some of the scenes that they do fine is the opening scene where Larry Boy takes down the Milk Money Bandit. The tone and the movements make it hardcore, which I've talked about in a video that I've done before. In fact, I remember getting goosebumps every time I watched this scene when I was a kid. But it was so much fun. But with that said, there are scenes where the suspense is earned and when it isn't. I remember doing a scene analysis on the Larry Cave scene, which I've talked about how it may have overdone the suspenseful part, where we get uncomfortable zoom-ins on the characters' faces. Yeah, stuff like that. That was one example of this movie going overboard with the suspense. Like, there's suspenseful, but then there's melodrama. And this was, oh my gosh, this was leaning towards melodramatic. Now, the scene isn't bad per se, but watch my video on this scene to better understand it, because that's what brings us to the next scene where the suspense is warranted. To an extent. Okay, with all the bad stuff out of the way, let's talk about the good. First of all, the the animation is better in this one. A lot more detail, shadows, lighting, the works. If you compare this with the first video, you can definitely tell that they had stepped up in the animation department. Well, sure, this whole thing was just practice for their theatrical movie Jonah, but in hindsight, you gotta give the animators a thumbs up. Also, the story. Despite its similarities to the first one, this one had a more interesting plot. Like, what would you do if a rumor was being made about you and you were oblivious to it the whole time? It shows you the consequences of a rumor gone wrong. Reputations are ruined and people are scared. Well, you should see what's happening in today's world. And this story can even relate to some people. Just leave out the giant anthropomorphic weed. Okay, now let's talk about her. The design of the rumor weed is both stereotypical and hilarious. Now I say stereotypical because you know that stereotype of ladies at the beauty salon with their gossip and all that? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But stereotype aside, she can totally pose a threat. Instead of playing it safe like the Fib, who only steps on cars and may wreck something every once in a while, here, the rumor weed doesn't mess around. She emerges from the dark, plays rough, and her evil spreads everywhere. Literally. But the biggest thing that the movie got going for it was the amount of screen time that LarryBoy was given. In this one, you see his mission explored and expanded. You also see him regrouping with Alfred after his first failed attempt to take down the bad guy. That we didn't get in the first film, I'll tell you that. And I'm certainly not talking about the missed opportunities that he had, turning a blind eye to the monster every chance he could. No, he goes face to face with the rumor weed, fails, and he goes back to the Larry cave to find out more about the weed. And of course, the action was a little better, although they reused animation from the first film in one area. And by God, I can't believe how intense that scene was with the Larry plane turning into a drill. Oh, I'm sorry. Boring machine. Boring machine. Huh. Don't get it twisted. That's a real line from the movie. But anyway, this movie was better than its predecessor because it utilized its hero a bit more, it took chances, and it had an interesting lesson on how words can hurt people. In hindsight, this video was getting somewhere. Give it a watch and decide for yourself.